Hi, this is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and today's video is part 2 of my pilot nib collection comparison video. In the last video, I did actual writing samples with each of the nibs, and in this video, I'm just going to do a visual comparison of each of the nibs and show which ones are interchangeable with each other. I've got all of these are the stainless steel nibs, and they're all interchangeable with each other. Some are gold plated and some are just the silver colored stainless steel. These 5 pins here have number 3 size 14 karat gold nibs. Now these 3 are actually marked number 3 size, and in my research it looks like the Pilot Grants is also a number 3 size, but it's not marked on the nib, so I'm going to test it. It looks like they use the same feed, so I'm going to test and see if they're interchangeable. I've got a couple number 5 size 14 karat gold nibs. I've got one inlaid, or you might call it an intarsia or a fingernail nib. It's a 14 karat gold nib, and one more steel nib in the Lucina. It's a little bit bigger, or seems to be a little bit bigger than these other steel nibs. I'm going to begin with a couple extra fine nibs. These are the only 2 extra fine nibs in my collection. I have one on a 78G. This is a 78G Plus. I can tell because it has laser engraving on the nib. The slightly older ones, the original 78G, the nibs are stamped, and some of my 78Gs have stamped nibs. But I just got a Pilot Kakuno because it has an extra fine nib, and I wanted to have a silver colored nib in an extra fine size that I could swap out on my Prera. And it also has laser engraving on the nibs. That seems to be what you see on the newer nibs. But I haven't tested this one yet, so when I finally do my writing sample with this one, I'll let you know how it feels compared to the other one, how uniform they are in writing experience. And you can see they both use the same style of feed. It's got the filler hole up here where the feed meets the section. My Prera has a fine nib, but I'll show it up here beside the others. You can see my Prera has stamped information on the nib, and it's similar in style to the 78G. It's a plain nib, very clean looking. I like that clean style. I don't know if the current Preras, if they've gone to laser engraving on the nib. I've got a couple more fine nibs. These are both 78G pluses. They've got the laser engraved nibs, so they look just like the extra fine nib. They're gold plated. But I have a fine nib on this Pluminix. It's marked fine, but if you look at it closely, it's a stub nib. There's no tipping. This fine nib came on this Pluminix, and the only place I've been able to find the Pluminix is on eBay. I think I also saw it on the UK's Amazon site, but I bought mine on eBay. The stub nib on my Metropolitan is a medium stub nib, but it is marked CM. I think that's for calligraphy medium. Now, it's also laser engraved, and you can see it's got a little design on the nib where you would normally see scroll work. It's got little lines. I was just kind of surprised that they didn't mark this one a calligraphy fine. Again, these all have that same feed with the filler hole up by the section. I really like these steel Pilot nibs for testing inks because it's so easy to pull the nib and feed if you're having trouble getting that last little bit of ink out. Look how easy that is, and you can rinse them out separately and really use a tissue or paper towel to really pull out that last little bit of inky water. And these nibs have little tabs on the side that are kind of, it's not perfectly round. They're mashed a little bit flat. And the nib has a little ledge here on each side that the nib just rests on. So you know you have your nib lined up correctly on the feed. And it's friction fit into the section. There's no flat spot, so it doesn't matter how you put it back in there. And some of these, like I noticed on my Prera, and some of these 78Gs, when I first got them, they were in there pretty tight, and I was concerned about, causing some damage when I was trying to pull it out. But since these aren't keyed, it doesn't have that flat spot, you can give it a little twist to, break that static friction as you're pulling it out. And this one is pretty loose, this 78G, but I use this exact extra fine nib for every one of my ink samples, and for a while I was pulling it out to clean it after every ink test. And then I noticed it getting a little bit looser. So now the only time I pull the nib and feed is if I'm switching between two different ink families and I've rinsed it out using a bulb syringe and I'm still getting some dirty water and I'm afraid it will contaminate my ink test for the next ink. But most of the time I don't have to pull it. Now this is a Jinhao. I just wanted to show what I was talking about. I don't have a nib on this one, but I just wanted to show on this feed. If you look at the section, see how there's a flat side and there's a flat side to the feed, so you can only put it in one direction. None of my Pilot pens have that flat spot. You can twist and pull the feed out. I also have a new Pilot Explorer that just came in that I haven't done any writing samples with. I got it because I was wanting a silver medium nib to use on my Prera. It has a similar feel to the capping mechanism on the Prera. Very similar. And it has the same type of nib that's found on the Prera. It's very clean, doesn't have any extra designs, but this one is laser engraved where my Prera is stamped. Same type of feed. Now the 78Gs that I've shown you so far have been 78G pluses. They have the laser engraved nibs. These two are the original 78G with stamped nibs. This one's a medium. I have two mediums. Let's see. This one's a 78G plus, and this one's a 78G. They write the same. Now there is a little bit of variation between the medium nibs. I mentioned this in my writing samples. I bought a 78G just like this one for my sister, and it wrote quite a bit drier, but it was really nice. It worked really well. It wrote very uniformly. It was very well tuned, but it worked really well on poor quality paper, and she uses her pens at work, so I gave it to her. Now this one is a broad nib, and just like the fine nib that came on my Pluminix, it's a stub, no tipping. This one's pretty crisp, though. I'm going to show you in comparison to the calligraphy medium. To my eye, it's a little wider and it's more crisp, and you can feel it when you're writing with it. This one, the broader, more crisp nib, is more dependent on angle. You've got to keep your angle right with the nib on the page, and so I prefer the medium nib, the calligraphy medium nib. Next, I've got a couple of Pilot Legnos. I've got the black finish and the red finish, and I've got a Pilot Stargazer. They're all basically the same pen. The Legnos have a wood finish and are a little bit lighter, and the Stargazer, I believe, is a brass pen, and it's got a nice lacquer on it, so it's got a little more heft to it. But they use the same nib. It's a 14 karat fine nib. And I can feel a little bit of difference. My two Legnos both have fine nibs, and the red one is a bit smoother, but the black one came to me. I bought both of these off of eBay. The black one came to me and it was in pretty bad shape. It wouldn't hardly write and it was scratchy in all directions. So I did some work on it, and I'm wondering if all that work I did on it made it a little bit bouncier. It has a bouncier feel, and I love the way it writes now. It's a joy to write with. But the red one came to me just perfectly tuned, very smooth, but it does feel a little more rigid. These are both fine, and I have switched them out on occasion depending on what kind of ink I'm using. I've been known to switch it out with this medium nib on the Stargazer, but I'm wanting to see if you actually can switch nibs between the Legno Stargazer and the Pilot Grants. These are both the Pilot Grants. I believe this one's a little bit newer than the gray marbled one. You can tell they have different clips, but they're very similar in every other way. They have the same type of nib, just a beautiful scroll work. And you can get the Grants. They come in different colors, different finishes. They have different models, different colors that they come out with. Some of them have gold hardware. Okay, I'm going to take these apart and see if they are interchangeable. Okay, you can see on these number 3 size nibs, they have a filler hole up closer to the nib. I really like that feature. They have the pinched in sides that fit in the grooves of the nib, but it's a different style nib. It's got your traditional type fins. They're pretty wide fins. They look like they're fairly durable. And there's a circle cut out of the nib. I don't know if that's just a cost-saving feature since gold is so expensive, but here's my Legno nib. I'm going to see how it fits. Yeah. Fit in there just nicely. And here's the Grants nib in the Legno. Yeah. So they are interchangeable. Now I have a Custom 74 and a Custom Heritage 91. They both have a number 5 size nib, and they're both marked number 5. The Custom 74 is a fine nib, and the Custom Heritage 91 is a medium nib. I usually swap these two. I have them in the pens that they came in originally, but I've been using them switched here lately. I believe the other pens that also use a number 5 size Pilot nib are the Custom Heritage 92, which is a piston filler. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there are any other pens that use this number 5 size nib. And here's how the number 5 size nib compares to the number 3. It's a decent amount bigger. And they both have the same style of feed, where it feels the filler hole is down closer to the tip of the nib. It looks like there's also a filler hole up here. Whenever I switch nibs on these two pens, I actually switch the nibs because the sections are interchangeable, but the sections are different colors. When I swap nibs on the Stella and the Stargazer, I swap sections because they have identical sections and they're all black. That I know I've heard people not necessarily complain, but just prefer sections that match the pen. Well, this is a case where it works out well that the sections are all the same color. Now the Grants has a different style of section, so if you're going to swap nibs with a Legno or a Stargazer or a Stella, you'll have to swap the actual nib and feed. My E95S has that 14 karat nib that looks like a long fingernail. I've done some research on whether it's possible to pull this nib, because mine, where your nibs, most nibs just barely touch at the end, mine still has just the tiniest bit of daylight, and it's a pretty wet rider for a fine nib. And I was just looking to see if you could pull this nib and I could maybe do a little work on it and get the tines to actually touch. But from what I've seen, it's not a good idea to pull the nib. So I've just grown to accept that this is a wet writing pen. My sister and I are planning to go to the St. Louis Pen Show this year, and I'm toying with the idea of having this nib turned into a little bit of a stub nib. I do like really fine stub nibs. I'm still thinking about that. And finally, I've got one more stainless steel nib on a Pilot Lucina. I actually have two of them. I've got the fine nib inked up right now, and I'm using it, and I love it. It's a nice wet writing fine nib. This is the broad. I really enjoy it too. It's a really nice writing broad nib and a wonderful reverse writer, very consistent. And the design of this kind of reminds me of the design on the Grants. Let me compare them side by side. No, it's a little bit different. This is your typical scroll work that you usually see, and this is just very unique, a unique design on the Grants. The information is stamped into it. It's very classy looking. When I compare it to the steel nib on the Prera, you can see it's a bit larger. And it has a feed that's different than the other steel nibs. And it's also different from the gold nibs. It doesn't have that little filler hole down closer to the tip. You can see the filler hole up here. And that's my collection of Pilots. I'm considering doing videos comparing my Sailor pens, and then another video comparing my Platinum pens. My collections of those pens are quite a bit smaller than my Pilot collection, but my sister has some Sailor and Platinum pens that I might be able to borrow from her, and so that might make for a couple of interesting videos. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.